Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome back to the WatchBox. You and my honored guests both. One man today, Roger Ruegger, Editor-in-Chief of WatchTime, the man who hath wrought what you see here. So, Roger, you are Swiss and you are a collector.
I'm struggling with the term collector because I have met so many collectors in my career working for WatchTime and also before. I do not consider myself a collector. I think I have more than one watch, but I somehow feel not comfortable in describing myself as a collector.
Let me just understand, how did this start? You're Swiss. I can see the beginning of a story there, but that's an unconventional angle. Not too many collectors are also Swiss. Worldwide, that's kind of a rare thing.
I grew up in the age of the Swatch, so somehow it was like a normal thing to do to wait in line for a store to open and sell the silver ball or the Goldfinger chronograph from Swatch. So that seemed to be like a normal thing to do, and we were all crazy for Swatch watches. My dad collected clocks and a few pocket watches, but more from a decorative point of view and less for this is a collection. So it kind of was something very normal in my household. I always wanted to be a writer. At the age of 13, I knew that I wanted to become a writer. I just needed to figure out which angle and how. And when I actually became a writer, I was forced to write stuff that I actually didn't really like. So what I needed was like a creative outlet. And I approached it very rationally with okay, I really love the internet. I happen to like everything that's happening on the water. And I love watches, and that's how I started with dive watches. It could have been at the same time something pilot watch oriented, because I happen to like planes as well. So it was basically a more rational approach to something very emotional.
No, it makes total sense. I came from the same background. I was public affairs in the Navy, and I used to write about things that were usually incredibly dry or unpleasant. It's like, well, what have we got today? Well, we're down for a safety brief, we've got a court-martial, and we've got a new ejection seat. And then I got out, and it's kind of like, well, I could just sort of follow my heart. Let's give the watch industry a try. And so the both of us, kind of by different mechanisms, but sort of followed the same path from enthusiast to full-timer, and we got to stay in the industry. Now, in terms of philosophy, you probably at some point decided what you liked, and even if your purchases were a bit more emotional, once you got a bit older, you must have started thinking about collecting, or at least what you liked and how that might guide your acquisitions.
It was different. I so much regretted every watch that I sold that I got slower. So instead of flipping and getting another watch on the cost of losing one that I already had, I just waited longer and I kept the other one. But I usually I'm more someone that's wearing a watch for maybe 3 months and then is up to the next one. And I have friends that actually change watches twice a day. And that's not me. I usually really look for watches that tell a story. And they're 99% it's a dive watch because of what I used to do. And once I told the story, once I wrote the review, and once I did the research and found out everything there is to find out about this watch, I do lose a little bit of interest.
So the thrill is the chase.
Yes.
I can agree with that.
But not the chase after getting the watch. Really, it's the chase after the story the watch has to tell, which might be very bizarre, but
no, that makes a ton of sense. You look at the popularity of Rolex watches globally. The Datejust obviously sells tons of units. More elegant watches like the Oyster Perpetual, they sell tons of units. But if you look at where all the sex appeal is, people are attracted to watches that have a romantic and purposeful story. You know, you have a Vacheron Patrimony, it's a wonderful watch, but what's the story behind it? A guy puts it on and goes to work. A guy puts on a Speedmaster, he goes to the moon. It's kind of hard to compete with that. He puts on a Sea Dweller, he goes to the bottom of the ocean. I mean, look, I'm super skinny, I freeze in the water, I hate swimming, my first quality watch was a diver. It works. It's a fact. There's no question.
And I mean, it's one of my favorite watches is the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. That's like, it's up there on my list. But because I have spent so much time in telling the story, I do not need to own one right now. So I'm much more towards the Batiscaf than the 50 Fathoms. Not because I don't like the watch anymore, but it's just, I told the story.
Well, that's a good point, and I've kind of been that way with my watches over time. I feel like once I've had time to internalize them, it's like I sort of own them forever. Once I know their story, I've experienced them, I've been there, and you know, there's that sense that experiencing the watches, once you're in the industry, is a big part of the thrill, because you get a lot of press pieces, you see friends' watches. A lot of the stuff, you don't become contemptuous of it because it's familiar, but it certainly feels like it's with you forever once you've had that glancing blow. What is still on your to-do list in that case? You've seen it all, you've been there.
No. First of all, unfortunately, the industry is launching new watches every year. And there is at least 3 a year that just make it on my list because I actually want to have one. So the list is getting longer every year, and I'm not that fast in buying. And there is always something new to discover. There are some amazing vintage pieces that just don't show up on a regular basis, so you have to wait.
No, that's a good point. So people ask me, like, when are you going to be done filming all the watches? You should be finished by now. I'm like, there were 30 new Pateks last year.
Yes.
Like 30 new watches per brand per year going back 80, 90 years till the beginning of the wristwatch. I'm never going to be done. So I guess what's on your radar? I realize you have a very fluid sense of collecting, but there must be some watches that you could say, you know what, my next watch or my next 3 watches will be one of XYZ. What's on your radar? What excites you most now?
Right now, and again, coming back to the list is very long, but
Yes.
there is a certain urgency to it where I really think I want to tell this story right now. I was fortunate to pretty much work through my whole list from 2018. I had the Seiko 68 reissue diver and the Bulova snorkel diver. They were both like, I knew after Basel these were the 2 watches that I needed to have, and I managed to get both of them. And I still have the Blancpain Batiscaf way up on my list.
Oh, I understand that. Wait for the right one to come along.
Yeah, they're all around. That's a problem. It's just it's such a beautiful watch.
You know what? Go with the first generation 2013 ceramized watch, the one they made in like 100 copies. Wait for that one to come along.
It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Okay, good stuff. Well, you have a very relatable collecting story because there's no Grubel 4C, there's no triple axis tourbillon, you know, there's no hand-painted enamel dial of my entire extended family on your list of objectives.
No, it really is. I'm a geek. I confess I am a geek. I know that the definition of a GRAIL watch could be the $1 million tourbillon from brand X. I don't think that I will ever be fortunate enough to afford a watch like that. So I'm sticking with what I have.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, the nice thing is we've both experienced those watches, and I think having held them, you're like, you know what? I'm going to have just as much fun with a Planet Ocean.
Oh yes, not even a Planet Ocean. If I buy a Seiko Turtle for $400, or if I just change the strap, which would be urgently needed for the Panerai in front of us, it feels like a new watch. The joy or the pleasure that comes with owning a new watch is totally disconnected from the amount of money I had to spend.
Good stuff. Well, Roger, I have to say, your watches are remarkably consistent from model to model, but I have to hear the story behind the Bvlgari, because that's not only different from everything you have here, the Doxa, the Ploprof, modern Ploprof, and the PAM 210, but the Bvlgari is different from anything else here and anything else you've described. What's the story there?
Yes, there are 2 exceptions in my collections. One is the Big Pilot from IWC, and the other one is this one. Important to say, this is not the collection. This is what I happen to have with me while traveling. I think the Octo from Bvlgari for me is remarkable because it's one of the very few brands and watches that look ahead. If for instance, if you look at the Doxa or the Ploprof on the table, and even the Panerai, they're all based on a vintage design. But Bvlgari is really producing contemporary designed watches, which is, for me, something very refreshing in the watch industry right now. And that makes it, for me, one of the most versatile all-day watches you can own. It's both elegant, it's sporty, it's contemporary, it's disruptive without being freakish, because the Ploprof still looks somehow out of place.
No, I can see
whenever that. you wear it.
You do wear it well, but yeah, it's a bit much.
It's big. It's not an elegant piece, and the Octo is the opposite of that. It's versatile. It's modern. It's a gorgeous design piece. And by saying gorgeous design piece, I do not want to diminish the watchmaking tradition behind it, because usually if you say this is a designer watch, there is a ring to it.
Yeah, it's not a fashion watch. It's a fashionable watch. It's not a fashion watch.
But it's everything you could hope for. It's versatile. It's a unique design. It has an in-house movement. It's affordable. Yeah.
And I think the lesson there for collectors is that you will know the right watch when you see it.
Yes.
You may have a collecting ethic, you may have rules, you may have customs. A bunch of your watches might look the same or be from the same tradition, and then suddenly something else strikes you, and if the heart resonates, there are no hard and fast rules that say you can't have a Bvlgari Octo in matte finished metal among all those steel sports watches.
Absolutely.
All right, Roger.
But these are the two exceptions, so it's a one Pilot, one Octo.
This is just, I mean, I gotta say, this is a fraction, I think, of your total Swiss holdings, which no doubt are squirreled away in some Zurich bank vault. But
there is only so much you can have in your luggage.
In terms of GRAIL watches, then, that's a really tough question to ask, because it sounds like it's a moving target for you.
Yes.
What have your past GRAIL watches been? If you can give me like a string of watches that have been the ultimate in your mind.
There actually is one watch that I might consider a GRAIL watch. It's the Seamaster 1000. It's not impossible to get, which makes it difficult to describe as a GRAIL watch, because GRAIL watch is either unattainable because it's too expensive or too rare. But I do like to hunt, and I don't want to spend like the price that everyone is asking for. So I think that there needs to be a little bit of hunting when it comes to collecting watches, and there needs to be a little bit of a bargain. And I wasn't able to find that Seamaster 1000 meter where, so yes, now I'm going to go with it. I pulled the trigger.
And I think that's a big part of the vintage appeal, because it's not like you're just, okay, here's I want to save up $5,000 and then I have the watch. You have to find a vintage watch.
Yes.
You have to find one that's the right condition, preferably one that is the right condition and the right price. And there's this sort of floating field of factors that all have to align. It's like the stars coming into alignment to find that right vintage watch. It's not just a matter of purchase and own.
Yes, and what I have learned over the years is to be patient. Maybe because I was too young and didn't really have the funds to build up a collection. If you're patient, pretty much every watch that you're looking for is at some point resurfacing again. Sometimes it's more expensive, and occasionally it's even less expensive because the market changed. Ploprofs right now are way less expensive than they used to be 3 years ago. So be patient. That's something that I had to learn, and I think that maybe because I started at a very early age to collect watches, that's one of my takeaways.
So what advice would you give to collectors who are maybe just starting? They're maybe not quite where you were when you were chasing the Swatch debuts, but maybe a little bit farther ahead of where you were when you were buying that first Speedmaster.
I think you really need to know what watch you're hunting for. In terms of, with dive watches, the most difficult part to replace or to find is the bezel. I still have a Certina 500 from the 60s in new old stock condition, but somehow the bakelite bezel is broke. So for 15 years now I've been looking for a new bezel insert, and I was not able to find one. Since I've learned to be patient, I'm sure that at some point I'll find one, but you need to know the brand. Brand with an inconsistent history will not be able to provide spare parts. It is much easier to get an Omega back to almost new old stock condition than it is with said Certina, because they don't have any spare parts left.
So it sounds like there's a couple of factors, things that you would advise new collectors. Know yourself.
Yes.
Do your research. Be patient. and perhaps also get a good sense of what's out there by experiencing a lot before you make that purchase. Like a lot of times it's tough to experience vintage watches because they're so non-standard, they don't come up consistently. But between watch clubs, you know, IWJG events, watch shows you can go to locally now, there's a lot of local events internationally. Just try to expose yourself to as much of what's out there as possible.
Yeah, and again, but that's my personal experience. I regret every single watch I sold.
What were some of those watches?
Now it's very painful.
Sorry to dredge up these memories.
And actually on my list are most of these watches that I sold. They're still on my list. So I had a black dial Certina Super PH 1000, which I was able to buy for 800. I was able to replace it with an almost new old stock yellow dial version. I unfortunately sold one of the Ploprofs, the first generation ones.
Oh, the 600 meter? Oh,
yes.
Dear.
That was a big mistake. Also a vintage Seamasters 300 Note 8 version plus, which is probably the one that's most painful to me, the Seamasters 120 meter chronograph from the 70s.
With the big blue?
Yes.
Oh my, okay. That's a hell of a list of ones that got away.
Yes.
I've just got the X33, I'm doing all right.
But you know, at the same time, I really like brands like Aquastar, and again, this is going back to know your brands. The Aquastar 500, the Bentos, is a Lemania-powered movement which cannot be serviced by almost no one because there are no spare parts left. And this needs to be factored in your purchasing decision. If you're spending $10,000 on this watch, it's not a good investment because there is a risk that you will not be able to find spare parts in the future.
And that's a big part of just doing your research as a collector before you get started, because there are modern brands that are like that. I mean, who on earth is going to take care of your Martin Braun equation of sunset?
Yeah.
I mean, no one. The cams, you can't replace them. The watches can't be serviced. You'll have a hard time getting a Martin Braun factory strap. You'd have to buy it new old stock on eBay.
And there is nothing wrong in buying these watches, but you just need to factor this in. There is a value in, I mean, let's go back to Patek Philippe. There is a value and there is an explanation why Patek Philippe is so much more expensive, because this brand has been around uninterruptedly and they are still capable of producing pretty much every part you might ever need to restore a watch. And this is very different to a brand that went out of business.
And that's a very good point, because I've seen stuff that's pre-Patek Philippe from 1839, 1840, 1841. It was Patek and Japek, and they're taking those watches back and they're servicing them in Geneva.
Absolutely, and they still have all these parts available. It's amazing.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
This.